You don't lack motivation, discipline, or intelligence. You're stuck because the very way you think is silently working against you. No one warned you that your mind could become your biggest obstacle, or that the habits you trust most are the ones keeping you exactly where you are. If you listen closely, you can feel the truth of that statement settling in, not as an accusation, but as a revelation. Because somewhere along the way, you were taught to look outward for answers. You were told to work harder, push longer, wait for the right moment, or find the perfect strategy. And yet, despite effort, despite good intentions, something inside keeps pulling you back to the same place, the same patterns, the same outcomes. That quiet resistance isn't fate, it is conditioning. From the moment you became aware of yourself, you began absorbing ideas about who you are and what is possible for you. Those ideas did not arrive loudly. They slipped in through repetition, through observation, through emotional moments you never questioned. Over time, they formed an inner framework, and now that framework interprets everything you experience. It decides what you notice, what you dismiss, what you attempt, and what you abandon before you ever truly begin. This is the inner conflict most people never resolve. On the surface, you want progress, you want clarity, you want momentum. But beneath the surface, a deeper program is running. A program that was built long before you chose it consciously. That program whispers what feels realistic. It defines what seems safe. And when an opportunity appears that challenges those boundaries, the mind reacts, not with curiosity, but with hesitation disguised as logic. You call it being careful. You call it being realistic. You call it waiting until you're ready. But readiness, as you've learned, never seems to arrive. And so life stays familiar, not because it is fulfilling, but because it is known. What keeps you stuck is not a single thought. It is a way of thinking, a pattern that repeats so often it feels like truth. You don't argue with it anymore. You live inside it, and because it feels like your own voice, you trust it. You forget that this voice was trained, shaped, and reinforced by years of unnoticed agreement. The mind seeks consistency above all else. It prefers the familiar discomfort over the unfamiliar possibility. So when you begin to imagine change, the mind does not ask whether the change is good. It asks whether the change matches the identity it has already accepted. If it doesn't, resistance appears, not as fear alone, but as distraction, doubt, delay, and self-justification. This is why effort alone rarely works. You cannot overpower a belief system with willpower for long. Eventually, the deeper program pulls you back into alignment with what it knows. And until you become aware of that program, you will keep mistaking its voice for your own truth. Awareness is not judgment. It is the first act of control. The moment you see that your thoughts are conditioned, you stop being their prisoner. You begin to recognize that many of the limits you feel are not real barriers, but inherited assumptions. And assumptions, once exposed, lose their authority. You are not broken. You are trained. And anything that has been trained can be retrained. But the process does not begin with force. It begins with recognition, with the quiet realization that your inner world has been shaping your outer results with perfect consistency. Nothing has gone wrong. You have simply been living in alignment with a set of ideas you never chose consciously. And the moment you understand that, a new door opens, not outward, but inward. Because when the inner order changes, everything else must eventually follow. What you call your personality is often nothing more than a collection of repeated thoughts. Thoughts you've practiced so long they now respond automatically. You don't think them. They think through you. And because they repeat quietly, day after day, they become the background music of your life. You stop noticing them, but they never stop influencing you. The mind learns through repetition, not reasoning. It accepts what it hears most often, especially when emotion is attached. A thought repeated casually may pass through. A thought repeated daily, emotionally, becomes instruction. Over time, the subconscious does not ask whether the instruction is helpful. It simply acts on it. It organizes your perceptions, your reactions, and your expectations to match the dominant message it has been given. This is why you can know better and still do the same. Knowledge alone does not undo conditioning. Insight does not erase habit. The subconscious operates below awareness, responding to patterns, not intentions. It moves you toward what feels familiar, even if that familiarity limits you. And because the movement feels natural, you assume it is who you are. Every inner dialogue you allow strengthens a direction. Every assumption you repeat becomes a command. When you consistently tell yourself that something is difficult, unlikely, or not meant for you, the mind accepts this as instruction. It begins filtering reality to support that conclusion. You miss opportunities not because they aren't there, but because your attention has been trained to overlook them. The most powerful influence on your behavior is not what you believe consciously, but what you expect subconsciously. Expectation shapes perception. Perception shapes action. Action shapes result. And the cycle continues until interrupted by awareness and deliberate change. Most people live inside a loop they didn't design. They wake up with yesterday's thoughts, face today with yesterday's assumptions, and expect tomorrow to somehow be different. But tomorrow can only express what the mind repeatedly accepts today. Without intervention, repetition becomes destiny. You see this pattern clearly in moments of hesitation. You feel the pull towards something more, followed immediately by a reason why now isn't the time. That reason feels logical, responsible, mature. But logic is often recruited by fear to protect the familiar. And fear does not shout. It reasons quietly. The subconscious mind is not creative. It is obedient. It takes the most dominant thoughts and builds behavior around them. If doubt is dominant, it produces delay. If fear is dominant, it produces avoidance. If belief is dominant, it produces movement. Not forceful movement, but steady, aligned action that feels natural. This is why change feels uncomfortable at first. You are interrupting a pattern that has kept the mind feeling safe. The discomfort is not a warning. It is a signal that you are stepping outside conditioning. And if you retreat at that moment, the old pattern strengthens. If you persist gently, consistently, the mind begins to adapt. Repetition is the language of the subconscious. Whatever you impress upon it repeatedly, it accepts as truth. Not because it is true, but because it is familiar. This is how character is formed. This is how limitation becomes identity. And this is also how transformation begins. You do not need to fight your thoughts. You need to replace them. You do not need to erase the past. You need to stop rehearsing it. The mind cannot hold two dominant ideas at once. One will always yield to the other through repetition. When you understand this, responsibility shifts back into your hands, not as pressure, but as power. You realize that every day you are either reinforcing an old pattern or installing a new one. Every inner conversation is either anchoring you to who you've been or introducing you to who you are becoming. This is not about positive thinking in the shallow sense. It is about deliberate thinking, choosing what you allow to become familiar, choosing what you allow to repeat, because what repeats remains, and what remains rules. At the center of all lasting change is belief. Not the kind you announce, but the kind you feel. Belief is not wishful thinking. It is a mental state that forms when an idea has been accepted so deeply that the mind no longer argues with it. Once belief is established, behavior follows naturally. You stop forcing yourself. You start aligning yourself. This is where most people understand faith. They treat it as something you either have or you don't. In truth, faith is cultivated. It is grown through repeated suggestion, emotional reinforcement, and consistent inner agreement. The mind does not awaken one day filled with confidence. It is trained into certainty through what it hears, imagines, and emotionally rehearses. The subconscious responds most powerfully to thoughts that are emotionally charged. A thought spoken without feeling is weak. A thought felt deeply becomes instruction. This is why moments of emotion shape you so strongly. In those moments, the mind is open, receptive, and impressionable. Whatever idea enters then leaves a lasting mark. You are always practicing faith in something, either faith in limitation or faith in possibility, faith in struggle or faith in growth, faith in doubt or faith in your ability to figure things out as you move forward. The question is not whether you believe. The question is what you have been believing repeatedly. Auto-suggestion is always at work, whether you guide it or not. Every sentence you tell yourself about who you are, what life is like, and what you can expect becomes a quiet suggestion. When repeated, those suggestions turn into assumptions. And assumptions, once accepted, are rarely questioned. You may say you want change, but if your inner dialogue constantly reminds you of past failures, missed chances, or imagined consequences, the emotional weight of those thoughts will overpower your stated desire. The subconscious sides with the most emotionally convincing idea. It does not respond to words alone. It responds to feeling. This is why imagining success without emotional engagement rarely works. The picture must feel real. The idea must feel familiar. When you emotionally rehearse a future outcome, the mind begins to accept it as possible, then probable, then normal. And once something feels normal, resistance fades. Belief changes how you interpret effort. Without belief, effort feels heavy. With belief, effort feels purposeful. The work does not disappear, but the inner friction does. You no longer ask whether it will work. You ask how to improve the process. That shift alone changes everything. Doubt is not eliminated by arguing with it. Doubt dissolves when it is no longer fed, when a new dominant idea takes its place. You cannot starve doubt by suppressing it. You replace it by strengthening belief until doubt becomes irrelevant. This is where patience matters. Belief forms gradually, like a habit. Each repetition adds weight. Each emotional agreement deepens the impression. At first, the new idea feels foreign. Then it feels possible. Then it feels familiar. And finally, it feels like truth. The mind accepts what you consistently present to it with feeling. Not once, not occasionally, but regularly. This is the law at work. It does not judge the content of your thoughts. It simply builds around the strongest pattern. When belief is established, action becomes natural. You stop negotiating with yourself. You stop waiting for permission. You move with quiet confidence. Not because you are certain of every outcome, but because you trust your ability to adapt. This is the power that has always been available to you. Not through force, but through alignment. Not through pressure, but through inner agreement. When thought, feeling, and repetition work together, the mind becomes an ally instead of an obstacle. Once belief begins to take root, discipline becomes something entirely different. It is no longer about forcing yourself to act against resistance. It becomes the natural expression of a clear inner direction. Discipline at its highest level is not rigidity. It is loyalty to a chosen purpose. Without a definite inner aim, the mind drifts. It responds to whatever is loudest, easiest, or most familiar. But when a clear purpose is established, the mind organizes itself around it. Thoughts align. Decisions simplify. Distractions lose their power because they no longer match the direction you have accepted internally. Definiteness of purpose is not a single moment of clarity. It is a decision reinforced daily. A quiet agreement you renew through thought, feeling, and action. The mind does not respond to vague wishes. It responds to clear direction. When you know what you are moving toward, even uncertainty begins to serve you. Inner control is not about suppressing emotion. It is about directing attention. You choose what you dwell on. You choose which thoughts receive repetition and which are allowed to pass. Over time, this choice becomes automatic. The mind learns what matters by where you consistently place your focus. This is where most people give up too soon. They expect immediate certainty, but certainty is the result of alignment, not the cause of it. You move first. You repeat the new pattern, and gradually, confidence catches up. The mind follows the lead of consistent behavior. Every small act of discipline strengthens identity. Each time you act in alignment with your purpose, you send a message to the subconscious. The message is simple and powerful. This is who I am now. And the mind responds by reinforcing that identity through thought and emotion. Inner order always precedes outer success. When the mind is scattered, results are inconsistent. When the mind is focused, results babbles. This is not because life becomes easier, but because you become steadier. Challenges no longer throw you off course. They become part of the process. Self-control is not harsh. It is calm. It does not argue with temptation. It does not dramatize difficulty. It quietly returns attention to what matters. Again and again. That quiet return is what builds strength. You begin to notice that your reactions change. Situations that once triggered doubt now trigger thoughtfulness. Problems that once felt overwhelming now feel solvable. This is not because the world has changed, but because your inner order has. A definite purpose gives meaning to effort. It transforms obstacles into feedback. You no longer ask why something is happening to you. You ask what it is teaching you. That shift alone turns struggle into progress. As inner control strengthens, so does patience. You stop demanding immediate results. You trust the process because you are aligned with it. You understand that consistency compounds, that small, steady actions guided by clear intent eventually produce undeniable results. You are no longer driven by impulse. You are guided by intention. And intention, when repeated, becomes identity. Identity shapes behavior. Behavior shapes outcome. This is the sequence that cannot be bypassed. The mind becomes a place of order instead of noise. You are not fighting yourself anymore. You are working with yourself. And in that cooperation, effort becomes sustainable. This is how quiet power is built, not through intensity alone, but through clarity, repetition, and inner agreement. When discipline flows from purpose, progress becomes inevitable. As inner order settles, something subtle but profound begins to happen. You no longer feel like you are trying to become someone new. You begin to feel like you are returning to who you were meant to be. The struggle to change fades, replaced by a quiet sense of alignment. Your actions feel congruent. Your thoughts feel intentional. Your identity starts to shift without force. Transformation does not announce itself loudly. It unfolds through consistency, through moments when you respond differently than you once did, through choices that feel natural now, but would have felt difficult before. These moments signal that the mind has accepted a new standard. Identity is the strongest force in human behavior. You do not act based on what you want. You act based on who you believe you are. When your identity changes, behavior follows automatically. Effort decreases. Resistance fades. The new way becomes the normal way. This is why lasting change is internal before it is visible. The outer world is always catching up to the inner one. By the time results appear, the transformation has already happened within. You are simply seeing the echo of a shift that occurred earlier in thought and belief. As your identity stabilizes, decision-making becomes simpler. You no longer debate every choice. You ask one quiet question. Does this align with who I am now? If it does, you act. If it doesn't, you move on without drama. This clarity creates momentum. Mental mastery is not about controlling every thought. It is about choosing which thoughts you give authority. Many thoughts will pass through the mind. Only the ones you dwell on shape your direction. Mastery comes from consistent selection, not constant suppression. You begin to trust yourself, not because you are perfect, but because you are consistent. You know that when challenges arise, you will respond with intention instead of reaction. That trust creates calm, and calm is strength. The past loses its grip because it no longer matches your identity. Old stories feel distant, not denied, but irrelevant. You are no longer trying to prove anything to yourself or anyone else. You are simply expressing who you have decided to be. This is where quiet confidence replaces motivation. You no longer need external pressure to move forward. Your direction is internal. Your standards are internal. You act because it is natural to do so, not because you are chasing approval or escaping fear. The mind becomes a place of cooperation rather than conflict. Thought supports action. Emotion supports direction. There is less inner friction, less wasted energy, more presence. You notice that your environment begins to reflect your inner order. Opportunities align. People respond differently. Circumstances shift, not magically but logically. Your behavior has changed, and behavior always alters outcomes. You are no longer waiting to feel ready. Readiness is no longer a requirement. You act from clarity, not certainty. And clarity is enough. This is the stage where progress compounds. Small actions produce larger effects because they are aligned. Time begins working for you instead of against you. Consistency creates momentum. Momentum creates results. You realize that self-mastery is not about domination. It is about harmony. When your thoughts, beliefs, and actions move in the same direction, life feels steady. Even in uncertainty, there is peace. This is what it means to step into inner power, not forcefully, not dramatically, but decisively. The old way of thinking no longer defines you. The new way no longer feels new. It feels like home. There is a calm that comes when you no longer argue with yourself, a steadiness that replaces urgency. You are not rushing to arrive somewhere in the future. You are grounded in the direction you have chosen, and that grounding creates certainty, not loud certainty, quiet certainty, the kind that does not need validation. This is the power most people search for in the outer world. In recognition, in control, in achievement. But real power has always been internal. It is the ability to remain centered while moving forward, to stay aligned when conditions change, to trust your inner order even when the outer world is uncertain. When the mind is disciplined, belief is established, and purpose is clear, fear loses its authority. It may still appear, but it no longer decides. Doubt may surface, but it no longer directs. They become signals, not rulers. Information, not commands. You stop reacting to life and start responding to it. That difference changes everything. Reaction is unconscious. Response is chosen. And every chosen response strengthens the identity you have built. Over time, this identity becomes unshakable, not because nothing goes wrong, but because you remain consistent regardless. You no longer measure progress by how you feel in a moment. You measure it by how you think over time, by the quality of your inner dialogue, by the stability of your focus. These are the true indicators of mastery. The world responds to inner order with outer opportunity. Not immediately, not predictably, but inevitably. When your thoughts are clear, your actions are precise. When your actions are precise, results follow. This sequence has never failed, and it never will. You realize that success is not something you chase. It is something you allow by becoming aligned with it. When your inner world is structured, the outer world organizes itself around that structure. Confusion gives way to clarity. Resistance gives way to flow. You are no longer trying to escape who you were. You honor the past for what it taught you, and you release it because it no longer defines you. The future is not something you fear or fantasize about. It is something you are steadily creating through thought, belief, and action. This is the timeless truth. You do not rise to the level of your wishes. You fall or rise to the level of your thinking. What you consistently think, you become. What you become, you express. And what you express determines what you experience. When your thinking changes, your life cannot remain the same. Not because of chance, not because of hope, but because inner order always produces producer order. This is the law that has always governed human progress. And once you understand it, once you live by it quietly and consistently, you are no longer stuck. You are simply in motion, steady, certain, and guided from within.